Brooke Warner, who is the CEO of She Writes Press, who's the publisher of the book. I want to thank my publicist, who's Fazio Burke, who's helped me spread the word about this book. Alexa Stevens is my support team #1, who has helped me learn how to do social media. My biggest, latest achievement, which I'm now getting slightly addicted to. And who else do I want to thank? My husband, who has read every word of this book. And we spent the whole pandemic reading and discussing it. And I want to thank Laura, because Laura was my writing teacher when I started putting this book together. And we have become dear friends. And we are now teaching writing classes together. And we are going to have a writing retreat this winter for anybody who's interested in going on a writing retreat. You'll have to email us as we get this project together. But that's what I'll start with.
Okay, that sounds wonderful. Thank you. And I'm very glad to be quizzing you this evening. So I just, in case you haven't gotten a copy of Judy's wonderful new memoir, here it is. You can get it from Shakespeare Company. It's delicious. It's so candid and revealing and sad and funny, and just very hard to put down. Yeah, I can't, I mean, I love Judy anyway, but her book is really wonderful. And I think whether you have an issue with your mother or a mother, you will find the writing really absorbing, and you'll learn something. I learned a lot from reading this, and I also couldn't put it down. So so please get your copies. So without further ado, so I'm going to ask Judy a bunch of questions and for like 40 minutes or so, and then Francoise is going to open up the floor to all of you, and you can ask questions through the chat. And we'll get started. So Judy, you, as Francoise mentioned, have written about, you specialize in eating disorders. You wrote a book about that. You also wrote a book about befriending your ex after divorce, and then you managed to get along with your ex after your divorce. And now you've written this really gripping memoir about working things out with your mother and mothers in general. So you specialize in dealing with difficult situations and somehow finding the light at the end of the tunnel. How is this book, how is writing this book different from your earlier books? Was it easier to write, harder to write? Just tell us a little bit about how it compares.
Well, I'll also thank my son, who inspired me to write this book. He said, "Mom, why don't you write about your life? Why don't you write about all these stories you tell me and Rachel?" And I finally decided he had a point, and I decided I would do it. And it was much harder, because it's much harder to be self-revealing, to write about yourself, than it is to write about other people. So that's the short answer to that question. It was also much more meaningful because it was my personal story, my personal journey.
Which is always harder to write, because you're writing about real people who, whether they're alive or dead, probably had a strong influence on you. At one point, you were considering fictionalizing this story about you and your mother. And I read some of those early fictionalized versions. What made you decide to actually get in there and write a memoir?
Well, anybody who's thinking about writing, I went to after my mother passed away, what honestly happened was I missed her much more than I thought I would. And I had been writing about my mother since 1983. So let me tell you the 1983 story. In 1983, I was getting divorced, and my mother-in-law, Ruth Rabinor, was getting remarried. And she came over to talk to me because we were very good friends. We remained close for the rest of her life. And she started telling me all these hysterical stories about what happened to her when she got divorced. I thought, really? I never heard any of those stories. I thought your divorce was pretty hard. But she told me so many stories about her divorce that I decided I was going to go to a writing class. So I went to a writing class and I started writing a book, which is still in my computer and I actually might get to. And the name of that book is called Between Marriages. And it started out with Ruth's very funny stories about what happened to her between marriage number 1 and marriage number 2. And she was kind of like an inspiration to me. I figured, I guess there's life after divorce. In any event, 3 weeks into the class, I was done writing about Ruth and I started writing about my mother. And I started writing stories about my mother and I just couldn't stop. Writing had always been a tremendous outlet, a comfort, a coping device for me. And so there I was in the middle of my divorce, writing stories about my mother and of course about my divorce too. And some of those stories have wound up in this book. As a matter of fact, the first story in the book was written in that class, and I schlepped that story around from writing workshop to writing workshop, trying to get it right. And do you think this would be a good time to play the trailer, Laura?
Oh, yes, let's play the trailer. Oh my
All
goodness,
right,
yes,
because
I love the
that's
trailer. Yeah,
all
yeah.
right. All right. So the
Sorry.
first thing I'm going to do is share my screen. Oh, host disabled, participant sharing screen. Okay. Francoise, can I share the screen?
Going to try. I'm making you a co-host, and that way you can share your screen.
All right. All the unknown things that happen in this Zoom life that we now have. Here we go. There we go. Now we're going on my desktop, right?
Yep.
And now sorry about this little glitch, everybody, but I think this is worth it.
Okay, that is a little problem for me.
Oh my gosh. Everything is in a different order here now, all of a sudden. I'm going to find it. Okay, I found it.
There, it looks like it.
Okay, everyone. So this is how this book came into being. I started writing stories and I had piles and piles of stories. I'm Judith Rabinor, a psychologist. I specialize in eating disorders and the mother-daughter relationship. Some years ago, I was giving a workshop, Mothers, Daughters, and Eating Disorders, honoring the mother-daughter connection. Suddenly, while leading an exercise, I broke out into a cold sweat and started trembling. I was blindsided by a traumatic childhood memory. I was 8 years old and it was a sunny June day. I was dressed in my new party outfit, sitting in the back seat of the car, happily humming along to Nat King Cole crooning Mona Lisa on the radio. I thought my mother was driving us to the city for my cousin Winnie's birthday party. Instead, she took me to the hospital, where she would leave me and I would have my tonsils out. To say I was in shock is an understatement. Wow. Somehow I finished leading that workshop, and then I realized I am here helping other people, yet I'm troubled by one of my own unhealed wounds. I thought I'd made peace with my mother, but this trauma was only the first in a series of secrets, deceptions, and betrayals. This trauma had resonated throughout my life. I made a commitment to dig deeper and heal. It wasn't easy, but what I learned made me a better therapist and a better person. If you are like most of us, you have some baggage, unresolved issues that keep you stuck. The Girl in the Red Boots is my story, how I came to recognize my own blind spots and broken places, how to understand, accept, and make peace with my mother. If you have unfinished business with anyone you love, it's never too late to dig down deep, change your story, and change your life. The Girl in the Red Boots can help you get unstuck.
I love that.
Well,
That was great.
That was 60 hours of work one weekend, but I
Wow.
truly loved making it. I thought maybe I'll go into this profession after that.
That was great.
Thank you.
I love that. So let's just talk a little bit about writing the book, so you are a therapist of many years, and you had thought about fictionalizing the book. What made you decide to actually turn it into a memoir and not fictionalizing it? We talked a little bit about you sort of fearing exposure and how much should you reveal.
I learned in taking both a class with Laura and another writing class that my stronger voice was my memoir voice, because it was really my story. And that's why I left the fictionalized version, stayed with this version. So I want to just say, because we just looked at that trailer, I really had a very positive childhood. I was not the daughter of Mommy Dearest. My mother made some mistakes. And it took until I became a parent and I made my own mistakes that I understood that imperfect love is really all there is, that everyone makes mistakes, that parents make mistakes. And that's really the message of my book. Imperfect love has to be good enough, because that's all there is. So I had all these stories, and in the first chapter of the book, I tell that story. That is how the book opens. But by the end of the story, of the first chapter, I tell another story. And that was the strength that I got from my mother. And that is the story of the girl in the red boots. And that story, somebody who came to another talk I gave said, oh my God, I saw the girl in the pink sweater, the girl in the red boots wearing the pink sweater. Because my mother gave me my red boots, and she had a story she loved to tell about me. I remember in particular, any occasion, especially my 50th birthday party, she'd say, this is my story about my daughter. When she was 4 years old, she wanted a pair of red boots. She insisted that I get these boots for her, and I took her into the store. She would not let the guy take the boots off of her. She ran down the street, splashing people. I finally got her home, and that night I couldn't get those boots off of her. The next day I woke up, where's Judy? No 4-year-old Judy. I looked outside and there was Judy, riding her red tricycle with her red boots and nothing else on. Now, my mother loved to tell that story, and I don't know whether that story says more about me or about her. The fact that she got such a kick out of her rambunctious, independent, adventurous daughter was really part of the legacy that she gave me. So there I was, holding in my hands and my heart my two stories. How could you do this to me? I'm not going to tell you any of the other betrayals. You'll have to read the book. But how could you do something as idiotic as what? Follow doctor's orders, tell me I'm going to a birthday party, get me dressed up in a new outfit and leave me in the hospital? How could you do that? And yet you were the same mother who loved the fact that you raised the daughter with the red boots. And so from the beginning, I was juggling the part of me that was so angry at my mother and the part of me that loved my mother and felt like my mother gave me so much.
It's such a common struggle, you know.
And it was the exact struggle I saw in my office every single day. I love my mother, but if I was going to rename this book, that's what I might call this book or the next one. I love my mother, but there were so many buts, and yet the love was so deep. And how was I going to ever figure out how to put this all together? So tell me what the question was again, because I went off on a little tangent.
Well, I was asking you sort of, how did you have the courage to write about your mother when you are a therapist and you have children who are alive and well? And, you know, what made you feel that you could do this now?
I had two missions. One mission was to demythologize the perfect mother, because there is no perfect mother. And I spent my whole life wishing that I had a perfect mother. Now, that was another problem that I kind of got from my mother, because my mother told me that her parents were perfect. And I would say, Mom, how is that possible that your parents were perfect? You were a teenager. Didn't you ever stay out too late? Wasn't your room ever a mess? Didn't you ever cut school and say you were going somewhere else like I did? She'd say, I don't remember anything bad. Here, I have to show everybody something. A patient once gave me this. I don't know if everybody can see it. These are the three little monkeys. Hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil, right? And that is really what therapy is about. Therapy is about helping people know that there is a dark side to life. And the dark side it's something that my mother never wanted to talk about. She said that everything was fine. I was fine, even though I was mad at her my whole life about this tonsil story. She said, but didn't you turn out fine? So it couldn't have been so bad. And in a way, there has to be some truth in that, right? I didn't turn out so bad, but I still carried a grudge. So that's
well, for good reason. I mean, if
for good
people read your
reason.
book, they will see that as an adult, she also,
Had a few
was
other, we had
capable
a
of
few other
betrayal.
run-ins, a few other
Yeah.
run-ins. But one of the things I learned as a therapist is that behind every grudge, behind every criticism, behind every complaint is a longing.
Mhm.
And I had a longing.
love-
The
yeah.
longing was to be closer to her. I wanted to be closer to her. And I feel quite relieved that by the end of my life, I never resolved all of this, but I still felt closer because the end of her life was pretty sad. But we can get there when we get to that part.
Well, actually, I do want to ask you, did writing this book make you feel closer to her and help you resolve some of your conflicts? Because we know writing is very therapeutic and healing, but did that actually, we know that we teach it, but did you actually feel that by the end of your writing this book?
I actually felt it. I felt like the writing was a ritual of mourning. And I honestly think, you were you encouraged me to publish with She Writes. You said, Judy, publish this book. You've been working on it your whole life. And I had been working on it in your writing class and in other classes for another bunch of years. So I liked writing it. I mean, if there's anything that you would like to resolve, write about it.
So let's talk a little bit about how you began your writing process, because I know your paternal grandmother took you to see Anne Frank, who of course was the darkest of writers, or certainly cover some of the darkest of subjects. Tell us a little bit about your going to see the play and how that began your writing career.
Okay, so
Hi,
so when I was 12,
listening to a webinar.
could somebody turn put yourself on mute, please, who's talking on the phone? Thanks. So when I was 12, my grandmother took me to the Diary of Anne Frank. Sitting in the dark, I was mesmerized by this scared girl trapped in a tiny room. When we got on the Long Island Railroad to go home, my grandmother gave me a diary. She said, this is yours. And I loved my grandmother and I loved my diary, and I began writing, and I called my diary Kitty, just like Anne Frank's diary. And of course I knew I was lucky me living in an upscale suburban Jewish enclave in New York, not Anne Frank living in Germany, Amsterdam. But nonetheless, she was my role model. So I had two role models. One was Anne Frank and the other was Nancy Drew. There weren't that many role models for women of my generation.
Yeah.
I mean, Nancy Drew had her own car. She had her own keys. She was really, she had everything. She was an independent woman. But anyway, so
Yeah.
that's how I get into writing. And even now, I still have journals. I still write all the time. I have piles of journals everywhere. And eventually those journals, some of them got woven into articles and woven into books. But I feel I was quite lucky. My grandmother was an unusual woman. She herself published 3 books. She self-published them, but she was a very creative and inspiring woman. And she gave me a typewriter when I graduated high school. So
The perfect gift for a writer. Well, so just talking about writing, tell us a little bit about your writing process. Do you do it in the mornings? Do you have a ritual? Sort of show us sort of you at work.
my husband's going to laugh when he hears me say this, but he says, my wife is the only person who can get up. She doesn't have to brush her teeth. She turns on the computer. And I don't check email. I turn on the computer and I try to write whatever is in my mind, and of course, I'm always working on something. So, and even preparing for all the talks I did about this book, new ideas are always being generated. So that's what I like to do. I like to write early in the morning. My husband would say, my wife can stay in bed until 3 p.m, working on whatever she's doing, get the whole bed filled up with lots of papers. And it's just ecstasy to me.
So do you do every day? Do you write?
No, if I also like to play tennis. So if I'm going to play tennis, I can't write in the morning. Right, exactly. But I like
Good
in
answer.
the morning the best. I don't schedule anything that I don't have to in the morning, so that I can do that when my brain works. And the older I've gotten, the more I'm sure my brain stops working later in the day. That's when all my fresh creative ideas are there.
And you have to know that about yourself as a writer, when your brain is going to work its best. Like it's good to know that and to sort of incorporate that. So let's talk a little bit about the actual part of the book is not just about your mother, it's about working with patients and sort of helping them navigate their own mother-daughter relationships. Tell us a little bit about the process of, did you consult your patients? Did you tell them you were writing about them? Talk about that a little
Yes,
bit.
first of all, every patient that's mentioned in this book has been disguised, so that if they read what I wrote, they might recognize the clinical moment that they were in an office with me, but their mother, if she read that book, she wouldn't know because they were disguised by an age, by religion, all sorts of things. And most of the patients are composite characters, and I have permission from everybody who would be vaguely identifiable. But it was another mission I had in writing this book was that most therapists who write about patients write about how the therapists heal the patients. But I wrote about how working with patients opened my eyes to my own blind spots. And seeing things that went on in my office made me look at myself. And I think that is one amazing thing about being a therapist, why so many people on this call are therapists, and we all don't want to stop being therapists, even though we want to work less and not take more new patients, but that it's a field that forces you to look at yourself. And can I give a great example?
Sure.
Oh, I tell the story of a woman who's sitting there yelling at her mother, and she's saying, "How could you have done this to me? You dragged me from diet doctor to diet doctor. You put me on all these pills. How could you have done this?" And her mother said to her, "I didn't want you to have the same fate that I had. I was the fattest girl in the class. And so when you started gaining weight, I went to a doctor and the doctor told me to do this. I followed doctor's orders." Bum, I thought. And this young woman who was 20 years old, a college student, suddenly she got something. She got that her mother had followed doctor's orders because that's what she thought she was supposed to do. And I had been writing this story already a million times about how my mother followed doctor's orders. And I had felt so wounded and so abandoned and so unattuned by a mother who did something that I thought was so terrible. And I guess I was forced to think, how is it possible I have so much compassion for my patient's mother and I don't have compassion for my own mother? And that was a theme that came up as I wrote the book. And there was a line I wrote in the beginning of the book. My mother was born in 1918. And 1918 was 2 years before women got the right to vote. And in writing, you are forced to slow down. I am a very fast-paced person. I saw something in the chat. I'm not supposed to be looking at the chat, but somebody wrote, "Judy's brain never stops." Well, that's not true. My brain does stop. And when you write, your brain stops. And I started thinking what it means to be born when women do not have the right to vote. And I can't tell you why, but I started doing some research and all of a sudden another memory floated into my mind that when I got my first credit card, I was a teacher and my husband, my first husband, was working and he was building a building and he was not even earning any money. I was the one earning money. He was not earning money. Credit card came in the name Mrs. Arnold Rabinor. Why? Because women could not get credit cards in their own name until 1975. You know, young women today have no idea what it meant to grow up in the 50s and the 60s, where girls were expected to go to college and get their MRS, That was the point of a college education. And I realized somehow in thinking about this, that now if I go to a doctor and I'm given any diagnosis, I run right home and I look on the internet and I call up everybody I know. But my mother was born in 1918 and there was no internet. And people did not question doctors the way they do. If the doctor told her, tell your daughter she's going to a birthday party, she would think the doctor knows. The doctor knows. And frankly, I know that I was not the only child of that era to be told I was going to a birthday party, because in telling that story, many times I learned that other children had the same experience. Now, what was unique about my mother is that she was insistent that I was fine, even though I was telling her, I'm not fine. I'm not fine. Don't you understand? Now I'm a psychologist and you betrayed me. And I feel like I have trouble trusting people. And I had a lot of things to tell her that I learned from my own therapist. But as I wrote, I began to have more compassion for her as I got older, and I recognized all the things, all the ways that I made my own mistakes.
Let's jump ahead a little bit, and we don't have to do the big reveal about what your mother did that you did interpret as sort of the ultimate betrayal, but what it sent you off to graduate school, right? Because
yes. So when I found out that my family was not exactly the family that I had thought that I grew up in, and that my parents' marriage was not exactly the marriage that I thought they had, I thought, how is this possible? I think I'm so smart. And I already had a master's in English and I was an English teacher. But I thought, how did I not understand? How did I not see what was right before my eyes? And I went back to school and I became a psychologist. So in a certain way, I feel like for many therapists, we wound up researching our own families. And that's how we became therapists. And it's a pretty fascinating, and it's a lifelong passion, just sort of investigating how people become the people they are. And there's not like a fast answer.
And you used some of your Nancy Drew skills to sort of investigate sort of the source of your mother's betrayal, which is one of the best chapters in the book. And if you haven't read it, I really urge you to. It was a brilliant cinematic scene of you going back to your parents' house and sort of sneaking around. And I won't give it away, but it was really a terrific chapter, and I couldn't put it down. So in a way, my point is, your mother, in her own strange way, was the impetus for you to go become a therapist and get your PhD.
And if you don't mind me saying so, it was you who said that to me many years ago in a writing class.
All right, yay me.
Now I take it as my own insight, but honestly, it was you who said to me, well, I wonder if you would have become a therapist if your mother hadn't, if you hadn't had some of these experiences. And you were right.
It was the inciting event, as we say in writing school.
Inciting event, exactly.
And so let's just talk a little bit. You had mentioned that your mother was born 2 years before women had the right to vote, which was a huge, that is a central event in the 20th century. Do you think that her sort of avoidance of discussing feelings or sort of going into her interior life was very sort of, that's how women were during that generation, men too, probably even more so? And would she have been different if she had been born, 20, 30 years later?
I can't answer that, because there were other people who were her age who were much more insightful and who wanted to dig down deep. And I had relatives even who were more thoughtful. But I think it was her way of avoiding painful things that happened in her life. And I think that's just some people, I think we're all a combination of nature and nurture. And I think I was just born with more of a propensity to look at the dark side of life. And there are a lot of people who are just born that way. And I describe my mother in the book as being uber optimistic, and that we were just a bad match in that way. And there are a lot of people who feel like they're a bad match with their parents and with their children. And it's really tough to overcome. I mean, I must hear this over and over in my office. So I don't know, but I did give her a big pass on some of this as I thought about her life. And then I myself had to face that when my father was very ill and dying, that the doctor told us, and this was in the 70s, don't tell your father he's dying. Tell him he's getting better. And I was already in graduate school, and we went along with this. We thought it didn't sound right, but we didn't say that's wrong and I'm not doing it. And I wrote
Yeah.
about that. And that was another moment of really an awakening for me. But I wouldn't say the awakening came right then. It came as I've gotten older, and maybe it came as my mother was dying. And my mother, well, my mother died at 93, so she knew that she was going to die. But when my mother was dying and I sat with her and I said, Mom, I'm here with you. I'll sit with you. And my mom didn't want to let go. She wanted to live. Right.
All that optimism does sort of often breed long lives and tenacity and resilience. I mean, I tend to gravitate to dark things too, but the people who carry the light do tend to live longer lives. So
I think you're
your
right.
mother did.
I love that you said that.
Oh, thank you. So let's just go a little bit. So you did become a successful therapist, and as it turns out, you were on Sally Jesse Raphael and Oprah, and your mother became a huge fan and came to watch you when you were on TV, and began to cry. Do you want to talk a little bit about that experience of having her watch you?
Well, I love that chapter. There's a chapter in the book called Sally Jesse. And the fact is, I got invited to go on Sally Jesse Raphael. My mother was addicted to this show. And there was my mother who always drove me crazy. And the first thing I did when I got invited to the show was I called my mother. And the first thing my mother said to me is, what are you going to wear? And don't wear that pink jacket that you wore on Oprah. That was the wrong jacket. And my mother then said that she was going somewhere like to Bloomingdale's or Bon Teller, and they were having a sale, and she would buy me a new outfit. And I wanted to slam the phone down on her, but I didn't. And she came with me, and she came with me to the show. And the crazy thing is that my mother was sitting in the audience, and I did fabulously on the show. The whole story is written up in the book. And Sally Jesse was walking around the audience, and she walked over to somebody who was crying, and the woman had her head down. And all of a sudden I'm looking, and it's my mother. So Sally says to my mother, "You're crying. What's making you cry?" And she said, "Dr. Rabinor is being so wonderful with those girls." And I thought, phew, at least she didn't say she was my mother. That would have blown the whole thing. Well, then we go out for lunch after that. And I said, "Mom, you were crying." She said, "Is that wrong that I was crying?" I said, "No, it was so touching. Why were you crying?" She said, "I don't know." Now, my brother said recently, he said she was crying because she was touched that she saw her daughter on this show doing such a good job, but she didn't say that. What she felt it was, you're not supposed to cry. And I thought, I better find out more about this. I've been annoyed at my mother. And so I said, "But what's this thing you have about crying?" She said, "I just don't like crying." I said, "Well, but how did you never cry? I didn't see you cry when Dad died. Then my mother had 2 other husbands after that. I didn't see you cry when Lou died, when Herbert died." She said, "Judy, January is a really sad month for me. And you know what I do when I'm sad? I get theater tickets. I stock up on theater tickets the month of January." You know,
Very practical.
Practical, it's a way of coping. And I think
Yeah.
my relationship with my mother started to improve when I started to accept that we were just different. That when I felt sad, when I got divorced, when I broke up with the first person who I thought I was going to marry after I got divorced, I wanted to stay in bed with the covers over my head. I would wear the same clothes to work for like 3 days in a row and hope that I didn't see the same patients. I mean, I would change my underwear. But anyway,
You know,
and
I just forgot to mention, the reason you were on Sally Jesse was you were helping mothers and daughters navigate their own tumultuous relationships. If I remember correctly, there were like 3 or 4 mother-daughter couples,
Right.
and you were sort of counseling them, and that's what your mother was responding to.
Right.
What a good job you did.
The great job I did, and it was called Mothers, Daughters in the Battle of the Bulge. And here were all these mothers and daughters bickering at each other about who was thinner and who lost weight and what one ate and what one didn't eat. That's exactly right. And she was so touched. And it was just a very critical moment where she came, where, first of all, I saw how moved she was, which is probably what I wanted, because earlier I said, behind every criticism is a longing, and what I wanted is to feel like my mother got me. I wanted her to feel like, I wanted to feel like she got me, that no, it's not okay when your best friend drops you and you're scapegoated for a whole year. It's not okay to say you're going to be fine. You are going to be fine. But what I really wanted was empathy. And I felt like I saw something in her, and the whole conversation made me just feel a whole lot closer to her.
Which is lovely, ultimately. What do you think she would have thought of this book if she were alive to read it?
Well, I know. What do I think? Well, she would have loved the end, because in the end, my mother becomes my hero. Because before this talk ends, I do have to say that for most of my mother's life, I thought that I was mad at my mother, and I thought my mother would rather make a Jell-O mold than finish reading the Diary of Anne Frank. That's just what I thought of my mother, that she was busy always making Jell-O molds and talking about all sorts of things that I thought were not very important. But at the end of my mother's life, or not at the end, when she was in her late 50s, she came to me one day and she said, I think I want to go back to college. Go to college. She had never gone to college. I go to college. I had never heard this. Where did this idea alight from? And then I remember there had been a Hanukkah right before that, and I gave my kids all the same little plaque, and it said, wherever there is a single spark, a great fire can be ignited. And I realized my mother had a single spark inside of her, that she really wanted to go to college. And the way her life unfolded, she did not go to college. And
if people read your book, they'll read why. It was a very sad, but
it was a very
reason.
sad, and it was very important that she did. And all of a sudden, I remember thinking, how many people do I know who went to college when they were 56 years old and graduated at 63? And you know what? I've asked myself that question dozens of times, and I don't know one person who ever did that. And I thought the very same mother who was making the Jell-O molds picked herself up and went to college when she was 56 years old. And I have a beautiful picture of my mother on the steps of Fordham University, the same place that I got my PhD. And so we were at Fordham at the same time. And
that's very fun. What did she major in? Do you remember?
She got a BSW. She got a bachelor's of social work. And after she graduated, she did volunteer work at Roosevelt Hospital. And she worked in the discharge planning unit. Yep.
Okay. So she had more of an inner life than you thought. So I know we're going to open this up, but I just want to read one wonderful quote that came towards the end of the book, which I just loved. I'm just going to read it. Healing is a never-ending process. All that is necessary are a few crucial ingredients: the capacity to cultivate and tolerate living in the unknown, taking risks, falling and starting over, and the belief that our own struggles offer us the opportunity to build new strengths and resources. So I found that very inspiring and also very instructive, which your book is. It's candid, it's revealing, and it's also very instructive. So I hope everybody really learns from it, as well as is absorbed and entertained by it. So, okay, I'm going to turn this over to you, Francoise, or unless you want to add something, Judy.
Before I get to the questions, I want to encourage you to write, everyone, and if you have questions, please write them in the chat box. Right now we have 2. I just want to point to the links I've put in the chat box. One is for the girls in the red boots, obviously. There is one also for the two other books that Judith wrote. That's her page on our website. And then also there is a link to Laura's book, if you're inspired for cooking and cooking. This is the book for you. We have two questions. Let me get to the first one, which was way in the beginning. And it was, what advice would you give to divorced mothers to help their daughters to heal through the process and in later years as they continue to process its impact on their lives?
Wait, could you just repeat that question?
Sure, of course, it's
Thank you.
a long one. What advice would you give to divorced mothers to help their daughters to heal through the process and in later years as they continue to process its impact on their lives?
Well, I think that's a great question, because I think that to be a good parent, you have to help your child at every stage of life. And I mean, a daughter who is 10 when the mother gets divorced then becomes 20, 30, 40. And I think a good mother will be as authentic and genuine about how she feels about her divorce, why she divorced. She may have been the initiator. She may have felt that she was left. The question really requires like knowing the specifics. But I guess I think that being authentic and genuine is the best thing a parent can do in raising kids. And I think that I felt that my mother sort of hid under this optimism and that everything was fine, fine, fine. And I never even understood how not fine certain things were that happened to her and why she wound up going to college when she was 56 instead of 18. And I didn't know any of that. And I think being honest, I think that's why I became a therapist, because being a therapist is not about telling people everything is fine. It's about finding out what hurts and helping people figure out how they can live with it. Some things can be fixed and some things cannot be fixed. Some things are just lived with.
I love that. That's true, actually. There's another question. Should I read it, Francoise, or do you want to read it?
I'll do it. This one is from Howard. Did you, as a therapist, ever sit with your mother to address the issues that seemed to plague the relationship? As a therapist, I know you talked a lot about, the end of your mother's life, but did you, as a therapist, ever sit with your mother to address the issues that seemed to plague the relationship?
My mother didn't have issues that plagued her. My mother did not have issues that plagued her. She thought she had a great life. She thought she had, there's a chapter in the book about my mother's 80th birthday. And she said in that, we had a beautiful birthday party for her. And she stood up at the end and she said, I can't believe I'm 80. And she said, people get up and they offer me a seat on the bus. And I wonder, why are they offering me a seat on the bus? And she said, I've had a beautiful life. I've had wonderful husbands. I had perfect parents, and I have the best children ever. And recently I was talking to my brother and I said to him, do you think she really thought we were the best children? And we don't know what she really thought. We don't know what she really thought. But she surrounded herself with the idea that what she had was great, that we were a great family, and that she had a great life. And truly, she made a great life for herself. I have to say, she did lose 3 husbands, and she went back to school and she took classes at the 92nd Street Y, and she had subscriptions to theater and opera and all sorts of things, made many friends, traveled. She was not a person who felt sorry for herself one bit.
That is an ingredient for a happy life. Sorry.
I don't know who's speaking right now, but let me read the next question, maybe.
Sure.
As a mother, how did you avoid making the same mistakes that your mother made?
Oh, I made
find yourself repeating those same mistakes.
I made the opposite mistakes. My children, when they saw me coming, they would want to run the other way because they would know if there was anything wrong, we had to talk about it. If I even had an idea that there was something wrong, if I thought there was something wrong, I wanted to explore it. And they would say to me, Mom, stop therapizing us. You have your patients. So I did not make the same mistakes as my mother, but I made different mistakes. And that's another thing that I think we all learn who have gotten older. There is no perfect life and there's no perfect parent. And it's just important that we accept that imperfection is part of every relationship. And I think accepting that imperfection was part of my relationship with my mother has helped me accept that in all my other relationships.
Dan's comment might be apropos of what you just said, although he wrote it before. What your mother thought isn't as important as what she said or wanted to think. That's more than many moms.
My mother gave me the wisdom of her life. I would like to say that. And I think that Laura and I run writing classes, and I always give this, anyway, I won't do it now because we don't have enough time, but the idea that what can a parent do other than really give their child the wisdom of their life?
What was your mother's reaction to your divorce?
Well, I think I'll give another little hint away in the book. So when I went to my mother and told her I was going to get divorced, she said, sit down. She said, why are you getting divorced? I thought, don't you listen to me? Haven't I been telling you for many years all the ways we are incompatible, the kind of wife my husband wants, the kind of woman I want to become? And I reiterated all this. He wants a stay-at-home mom. I want to work. He wants this. I want that. I've been telling you this for many years. So, I mean, what I'm realizing in talking about this is my mother and I were extremely close, and that having differences didn't keep us apart. It just, that's what our relationship was like. She said, Judy, you are making the biggest mistake of your life. Don't get divorced, have an affair. I said, what? She said, don't get divorced. Your husband's fine. Quote, unquote, men are difficult and marriage is impossible. Why get divorced? He loves the children. He earns a good living. You don't know what's going to happen to you. You might get somebody with more problems. You might get somebody who doesn't like your children. You might get somebody who won't want to be involved with your children. Stay married. Don't get divorced, have an affair. Well, would you like to know what my reaction was to that? Or is that obvious from the way Laura and I are talking? My reaction was, this is idiotic. I'm 39 years old. I want more. I want something else. And then I felt we were very, very out of sync about that. But now how I feel all these years later, I do not feel that marriage is impossible and men are impossible. I do feel most men are difficult, but not all. But what I feel is that my mother was truthful. She was genuine. She was authentic. That is what she thought. And a friend said to me just recently that we were talking about something, and this is advice that many women would give their daughters today. Don't get divorced, have an affair. It might perk you up. You might find that you're a little happier. You might be more able to tolerate your husband. And I've had many people in my life who have followed that rigmarole, and it's worked. It just wasn't what I wanted. That wasn't the advice I wanted, but I do have to say, she shared with me her genuine, authentic belief about what I should do.
Having lived and coming to terms with your mother's view, how do you come down on the fine line between denial and creating one's own positive world?
owns one's own what?
Positive world.
There is no reality. That's one of the points of this book, that you can look at any part of your life and you can see it through a dark glass or through rose-colored glasses. You know, on my website, I write, change your story, change your life. Things happen, and some people see themselves as victims and other people see themselves as survivors. Every person who walks into my office, I happen to have a real strength-based, I guess I'm a lot more like my mother than I really realized. Because when someone comes to my office, no matter how down and out they are, I say, what brought you here today? And they tell me what brought them here. And I say, you have a lot of courage. You have a lot of strength. You want to face what's not working in your life. You're willing to take a risk. You're willing to take a chance. So, you know, you can see yourself as a victim and you can see yourself as a survivor. It just depends on the story that you tell. Did I answer that question? I don't know if that is the answer to that question.
Yes. There are a lot of glowing compliments and thank yous in the chat, and I will send it to you so you can read it on your time. But someone made a comment which I now have to find because they're coming fast and furious right now. And I think we can end on that note.
Can I just say one thing in closing? Can I say one thing in closing? I mean, the psychic imprint of our mothers lives on. And the proof of it is this sweater that I'm wearing. That when I decided it was safe enough to go into a store and I wanted to buy myself to wear to all my book launches, I bought myself a pink cashmere sweater set. And there's the most charming story in my book about my mother loaning me her brand new pink cashmere sweater set. And I bought myself a pink cashmere sweater. So in this way, I feel I am my mother's daughter. And I think that if we can honor the positive that we got, we have a better story, even if there were negatives. And there were negatives, and you'll have to read the book to find out what they all were.
So Zachary
Nice.
says, you made the same successes as your mother too. You let us know that you unconditionally loved and supported us, which has made all the difference in my life. You gave us red boots too.
I did. I gave my children red boots. That's so beautiful. Thank you, Zach. And Rachel, I saw you on here before too. I did. And my children have heard all the stories in this book. And I'm not sure what I'll do for the next book.
You come here for a book launch, that's for sure.
I'll try. Anybody who's in a book club and wants to recommend it, that would make me very happy. Send me an email and we'll work on it together.
Okay, and once again, please get your books from Shakespeare & Company. Support your local bookstores if you're not in New York City. And I want to thank both of you. Thank you, Laura. You were a wonderful.
It was a pleasure.
Partner. Thank you, Judith. It's a great book. Get The Girl in the Red Boots if you don't have it yet. And buy it from Shakespeare & Company.
And buy it from
everyone.
Shakespeare.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Francoise, and thank you, Laura.
This was great.
This was fun.
This was a
really
wonderful,
fun.
a wonderful conversation.
Awesome.
Wonderful.
All right. Thank you.
I'm going
See you
to
soon.
close the.
Okay, awesome.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Francoise. Bye, everyone. Thanks for coming.
Thank you. Thank you, Judy.
Thank you, Judy.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. I loved looking at the names that I could see as everybody scattered.
Congratulations, Judy.
Oh, Bill, I recognize your voice. Thank you so much. Bill is my college friend and my mother's doctor. And my doctor, Tilly.
My,
Hi. Who's there? John? Was that John?
yeah, that's,
I can't find you, but I hear you.
Hi, Maya. I saw you. You guys could see your face throughout this whole thing.
Judy, I love you so much.
Oh,
Congratulations. You
Thank
moved me to tears.
thank you so much. Thank you.
Oh, there's Larry. Who's
let's open the champagne. It's time.
I
Make the
know. Can
triumph.
you imagine? We didn't even have a party. Well, maybe we'll have a beach party this summer.
Hi, everybody.
That sounds great.
Right. Goodbye, everyone. I'm going to end.
Okay.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
I'll
I
talk
guess
to you
it's
soon,
Judy.
Judy.
Bye.